Well, welcome to the 700 Club. At historic levels, the national debt is now on pace to exceed the size of our economy. When did that happen last? At the end of World War II. So what does it mean? The amount the United States owes will be greater than all the goods and services we produce in a year. Well, how did the country get in this mess? And is there a way out? Jenna Browder reports.
The Congressional Budget Office says the federal debt is expected to reach or exceed 100% of the gross domestic product. The last time we saw this happen was back in 1946, after years of military spending to win World War II. The cause now, massive stimulus spending and reduced tax revenue in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Policymakers approving roughly $2.7 trillion in spending since March. At the same time, federal revenue fell 10% from April through June compared to a year earlier. What's more, from March to June, the debt swelled by 16%, nearly $3 trillion. Economists say that stimulus was necessary to keep the economy afloat, and more is needed. Dr. Stephen Skankey is Chief Economic Advisor at the wealth management and investment firm Keel Point.
Right now, it's a boost that helps keep the economy recovering and certainly keeps stock markets soaring.
But in the long term, it's harmful to economic growth.
It tends to impede economic growth. The expected rate of annual economic growth will just be less.
The gap expected to grow as Congress and the White House eye another round of stimulus. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says he's willing to sit down with Congress and negotiate a new spending bill to help struggling families and businesses. But the price tag is an issue. House Democrats say they'll settle for a $2.2 trillion bailout, more than twice the amount of a Republican bill in the Senate.
I do not support $2.2 trillion, but what's more important is what is the breakdown in getting money to American workers, American families, kids, where we can agree on money.
Despite a struggling economy, the stock market is going strong, and positive news on the vaccine front Wednesday pushed it even higher. After the CDC notified states to be ready for a vaccine by November, the Dow closed over 29,000 points for the first time since February. The S&P and NASDAQ also hit new highs. The exploding national debt could have severe long-term consequences, turning the U.S. into a debtor nation. The debt dragging down the economy and affecting our standard of living, and possibly weakening other countries' perception of the dollar, eventually ending its role as the reserve currency of the world. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
I was reading today in the book of Deuteronomy, and I remember, of course, before reading that we had, under the administration of Harry Truman, we saw Europe in devastation, and Truman felt so sorry for the suffering of these people. He said, let's do a plan where America can help them rebuild. And he said, they won't name it after me because people don't like Truman. They think it's political. So we name it after Marshall, who's a hero. So it was called the Marshall Plan. And America loaned money and gave money in massive amounts to help people. We loaned money to many. We were the arsenal of democracy, we called it. And now we are losing our status as reserve currency. We're in desperate trouble. We have forsaken the Lord. And in Deuteronomy, it says this, and I think you ought to look at it. 28th chapter of the Deuteronomy, the alien who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall come down lower and lower. He shall lend to you, but you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. And moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded you. And that you shall be upon you for a sign and a wonder on your descendants forever, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and gladness for the abundance of everything, Therefore you shall serve your enemies, whom the Lord will send against you in hunger, in thirst, in nakedness, and in need of everything. And he will put a yoke of iron on you until he has destroyed you. You know, we have a curse upon us. This pandemic is destroying our economy. We shut our economy down, and so many people are out of work. There are breadlines. People are suffering hunger. And this has happened to the most prosperous nation on the face of the earth. So just keep in mind, we need to turn to the Lord. I mean, if there was ever a time we should have fasting and prayer and crying out to God. Well, in other news, there's a dire warning from the Pentagon. The nation of China is growing its military, seeking to become an even greater superpower. John Jessup has more of that story.
That's right, Pat. In a new report to Congress, the Defense Department warns of China's growing nuclear and naval power. The report notes China is expected to double its arsenal of nuclear warheads over the next 10 years. It's estimated the communist nation now has at least 200 warheads. The report says China also has the world's largest navy, with a battle force of around 350 ships and submarines, compared to the United States battle force of just over 290. The U.S. Navy does have crucial advantages over the Chinese, including more aircraft carriers and, Pat, a network of about 80 naval bases around the world.
You know, I was wondering about the prevailing ethos that's driving Xi. You know, it used to be, it was called the Middle Kingdom. The Chinese were very peaceful. But when you go back in history, they weren't necessarily peaceful. The Chinese were, but the Mongols above them were anything but peaceful. And this is the Mongol Empire. Look at that. This is where they used to, in 1279, they had all of China, all of Russia, the Ukraine, and Iran and Baghdad. That was the Mongol Empire during Genghis Khan and then his grandson Kublai Khan. Now, that's what was there. And this is the ethos. You ask, what is driving countries? Well, the Iranians believe in the 12th Imam, that he's going to come back. They call him the Mahdi. And when he comes, there's going to be devastation in the earth. Millions will be dying, and he will come and set everything straight. That's what they believe, so they don't mind killing a few million people with a nuclear bomb because the Mahdi's going to make it right. What does Erdogan believe? He believes that he's going to re-establish the caliphate that was at the height of the power under Muhammad, and he is going to be the caliph, and he's making every move in that direction that he will establish Turkey and his regime to re-establish the caliphate. He's moving everyone in that direction. But what is the Chinese doing? They are trying to re-establish the empire of Genghis Khan. That's what they're doing. I want to show you that map again. You know, you say, what are they doing? This is what they're doing. That was under Genghis Khan. All the way, all of China, all of Russia, the Ukraine, and all of Iran, and most of the Middle East, at least that part of it. That's what they want to do, and that's what they're building toward. And if we get in the way, tough luck.
I wonder how Putin feels about this.
Well, Russia never had that kind of, you know, under Catherine the Great, they sort of broke out of barbarism, but Russia has never had that kind of expansive power, that they were under the control of Sweden and other nations. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, Peter the Great sort of taught him shipbuilding, and he went and lived in Holland for a while to teach them some technology. But Russia has never had that kind of authority. Of course, the communists did under the Marxism, but they've never had an empire like this. But he wants to do the same thing. Just keep in mind, China is a terrible threat to us now. It didn't used to be, but it sure is now, and that's what their goal is. They want to recreate the empire of Genghis and Kublai Khan. Mm. John?
Pat, the president is directing the Office of Management and Budget to provide guidance on cutting federal dollars to cities that defund the police, highlighting Portland, Oregon, New York City, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. for review. The 5-page memo also orders the Justice Department to identify and publicly list localities it defines as anarchist jurisdictions. The president tweeting Wednesday that his administration will do everything in its power to prevent weak mayors and lawless cities from taking federal dollars while they let anarchists harm people, burn buildings, and ruin lives and businesses. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo responded to the news saying, quote, "The president can't have enough bodyguards to walk through New York City. He better have an army." Some called that a threat, but a spokesperson for the governor said it was not meant literally. New York City receives $7 billion annually in federal funds. This summer, the city shifted nearly $1 billion from its police budget. Crime is now soaring, surpassing 1,000 shootings in the city this past weekend, nearly double the amount this time last year, which represents an 89% increase. Well, now to that vaccine we told you about earlier. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is urging the nation's governors to get ready for a possible vaccine by November 1st. Director Dr. Robert Redfield, writing in a letter to states that the government is, quote, rapidly making preparations for large-scale distribution of a vaccine in the fall. Critics fear the president is rushing a vaccine to get it out before the November 3rd election. NIH Director Francis Collins says it is unlikely there will be a vaccine in October, and the letter is simply an effort to help the governors be prepared when a vaccine does come. While some political analysts warn mail-in voting could cause a delay in determining who wins the presidential election, many Americans think results will come in fairly quickly. A new Axios poll finds 36% of American adults think we'll know who won the race for the White House on election night. 24% think it could take days to get accurate results, and 14% think it may take up to a week. Still, 8% say they expect it to take more than a month to know whether Joe Biden or President Trump wins the election. And Pat, that is a nightmare scenario.
Well, it's a nightmare, and they think if there's some kind of a tie and they don't decide it, it goes to the House of Representatives, and Nancy Pelosi could be the acting president. So you're looking at talking about a nightmare scenario. You've got it there. But I would urge people, I know I've been saying it looks like the violence is going to be a win for Trump, but it is absolutely imperative that everybody vote. Your vote is very important. Your vote counts, and you know, you're supposed to render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. Well, what belongs to Caesar is active, intelligent citizenship. And I urge everybody watching this program, be sure to vote. And if you can get a mail-in ballot, that's cool. But the polling places will be open, and regardless of what the weather is, you need to get your vote in. And I know you can hear somebody like me saying, well, it looks like the violence is going to, you know, give Trump the edge. Well, it is, but at the same time, if you don't get out and vote, it doesn't matter what's on the polls. The last poll is the one taken on election day, not what you read about in the papers. John?
And speaking of mail-in balloting and the difficulties with that process, the presidential election could face another major problem: foreign interference, as other countries find ways to intervene. Gary Lane has that story.
Attorney General William Barr first floated the idea about foreign election interference in a New York Times interview last June, saying it is a worrisome issue. Barr said, quote, "There are a number of foreign countries that could easily make counterfeit ballots, put names on them, send them in, and it would be very hard to sort out what's happening." On CNN Wednesday, he went further, naming the country he believes is working hardest to disrupt our elections.
Of those three countries that the intelligence community has pointed to, Russia, China, and Iran, which is the most assertive, the most aggressive in this area?
I believe it's China.
Which one?
China.
China more than Russia right now?
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Because I've seen the intelligence. That's what I've concluded.
President Trump raised similar concerns about Chinese and Russian mail-in ballot interference during an August 11th interview with Sean Hannity.
Who knows who's getting them? The mailmen are going to get them, and people are going to just grab batches of them. And you talk about China and Russia, they'll be grabbing plenty of them. It's a disaster. It's a rigged election waiting to happen.
Trump administration critics say foreign ballot tampering is highly unlikely because specific codes are used to identify ballots, and ballot designs vary from state to state. That makes counterfeiting on a massive scale extremely difficult, if not impossible. Other methods of election meddling are more likely. Utah Senator Mitt Romney is concerned about domestic and foreign electronic vote hacking.
There have been efforts to do so in the past. If that were successful, we would really have no way in some states to know what the right number was.
China may pose the greatest threat. On August 7th, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence announced China does not want President Trump reelected, and Beijing has been, quote, expanding its influence efforts ahead of November 2020 to shape the policy environment. China expert Gordon Chang says China could easily tamper with the election because much is currently done online.
But what I focus on is what China has been doing to manipulate opinion. So, for instance, there have been these malicious disinformation campaigns about the coronavirus and about the George Floyd protests. But also China has got its troll farms operating. So we've got all of these fake accounts.
In June, Twitter took down 174,000 fake Chinese accounts. Other social media platforms have done the same. So perhaps the easiest way for China or anyone else to sway the November election may come through propaganda and disinformation. That could pose the biggest threat to an uninformed American electorate, now relying on social media as its main source of information. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. Pat, a lot to look out for now, just 2 months to Election Day.
It's still going to be one of the most important elections in the history of this country, and people are woefully misinformed. And there's so much, the president called it fake news, but there's so much out there. And now if the Chinese and the Russians are meddling with the news sources, keep your powder dry and keep your head on straight, Wendy.
Remember back in 2000, how many weeks did we go without having a president? I can't remember, but it was a while.
We were dealing with hanging chads, and it finally went to the Supreme Court, and it was just crazy. I mean, we didn't know who was elected.
That was a nightmare, but some people say it could be worse this time.
Oh, absolutely, Wendy. It's going to be much worse because there's so many. But all this mail-in, they are just pouring ballots out. People, some are not on the rolls, some are dead. They still get ballots, and
crazy.
Or somebody could go to the mailbox and pick up a whole bunch of ballots and fill them out and drop them in the mail. I mean, it's a nightmare, and the president is absolutely right that this is a danger to our electoral system.